Today, we're going to talk about a case involving Henry Lee. Henry Lee is a famous Chinese-American detective who has helped the U.S. police solve countless major cases. The case we're talking about today isn't very well known, but it's definitely worth mentioning, because without Henry Lee, the killer would have remained at large. The case took place in 1973, when a murder occurred in a shopping district parking garage. A 21-year-old girl met a tragic fate. For decades afterward, no one even knew who was responsible. For a while after the incident, local residents were afraid to go out, because the killer could be anyone, anywhere. This case is the Temple Street parking garage murder. This case took place in the state of Connecticut, USA. Connecticut is located in the northeastern United States, covering an area of 14,000 square kilometers and ranking 48th among the 50 states. Connecticut isn't very large, but it borders New York City, the largest city in the United States, so its population is quite substantial. Today's story takes place in Connecticut's second-largest city, New Haven. New Haven is a city filled with greenery, with many historic elm trees, which is why it's also called the Elm City. Yale University, one of the world's top universities, is located here. In downtown New Haven, there's a street called Temple Street. The Temple Street area has many large shopping malls, and many locals come here to shop. Because it's so crowded, parking is scarce. So many people who come to shop here park in this 10-story parking garage. Although it means walking a bit further to the mall, at least there's plenty of parking here. In 1973, a 21-year-old girl drove a car into this Temple Street parking garage, planning to park and then go shopping at a nearby mall. But shortly after she entered the garage, something unexpected happened. So what exactly happened that day? Who killed this innocent girl? Next, let's go back to July 16, 1973. July 16, 1973. It was a Monday. At 1:15 p.m., the New Haven Police Department received an emergency call. The caller reported that on the stairs between the 10th floor and the rooftop of the Temple Street parking garage, they had found a young woman lying in a pool of blood, unconscious, and appearing to be in grave condition. They hoped the police would come quickly to check. After receiving the call, the police immediately rushed to the scene. Soon, they arrived at the 10th floor of the parking garage. On the stairs between the 10th floor and the rooftop, there was a young woman wearing a blue dress. After examination, it was determined that she had no vital signs. The police immediately set up a cordon, dispersed onlookers, and sealed off the entire parking garage to preserve the crime scene as much as possible. Soon after, forensic experts and investigators arrived at the scene one after another. The police investigation officially began. The woman on the stairs was curled up in a fetal position. She had 2 stab wounds to the chest. There was a large pool of blood on the ground. The initial judgment was that she died from excessive blood loss. On several floors of the parking garage, different numbers of blood drops were found on the ground. The spacing between these blood drops varied. They were not only found near the girl, but also from the 10th floor down to the 5th floor. Based on these blood drops, the investigators could roughly determine the movement path. On the 9th floor of the parking garage, a blue Buick was found. It was a 1971 Buick Electra. The car was unlocked. There was blood on the door handle. In the back seat, a tissue box was found on the floor. A fingerprint was lifted from this tissue box. In addition, a wallet was found in the car. The wallet contained $14.75. A parking ticket was also found in the car, which showed that the car had entered the Temple Street parking garage at 12:42. An unopened envelope was also found in the car, which contained dental records. Among the physical evidence found at the scene, there was quite a lot of useful information. Therefore, the police quickly identified the victim. Her name was Penny. She was 21 years old and worked as an assistant at a local dental clinic. This Buick was the car the victim had driven into the parking garage. Through the license plate, the police discovered that the car belonged to the victim's father and immediately notified him. Then, investigators on the 7th floor of the parking garage found a man's handkerchief covered in blood. Investigators took the handkerchief, the tissue box, the car door handle, and the multiple blood drops found on the ground for testing. The results confirmed that all were type O blood. In the blood, trace amounts of Freon were also found, as well as mechanical oil components. Freon is commonly used as a refrigerant, and combined with the mechanical oil, this suggested that the killer might work in a profession related to automobile repair. After forensic examination, it was determined that the victim Penny had type B blood. The fatal wounds were the 2 stab wounds to the chest. Her body had not been assaulted. From this, it could be inferred that all the type O blood found at the scene belonged to the killer. The Temple Street parking garage has 10 floors. The closer to the bottom floors, the more cars there are because the higher you go, the further you have to drive. The top floors, 9 and 10, have very few cars, so there are naturally fewer people around. From the time the victim Penny drove into the parking garage until the police received the call, only half an hour had passed. Even so, there were 5 witnesses in this case. They each saw the killer on different floors. Some witnesses saw a thin man chasing a girl. The man was white, between 18 and 35 years old, with something wrapped around his hand, possibly injured. Other witnesses saw a man hurriedly getting into a car and driving away quickly. Among the 5 witnesses, the one closest to the killer was the parking garage attendant at the entrance. According to the attendant's recollection, when the man was leaving the parking garage, he handed over a parking ticket covered in blood. The attendant thought this was strange, so he glanced into the car and saw that the driver's left hand was bandaged, seemingly bleeding. The attendant kindly asked him, "Do you need any help?" The man replied, "No." Later, the attendant didn't think much of it, collected the parking fee, and let him go. In parking garages at that time, the time was recorded manually. When a car entered, the attendant would write the current time on a parking ticket and give it to the driver. When the car left, the fee would be calculated based on the entry time written on the ticket. For convenience, parking tickets usually only recorded the time, not the license plate number. Therefore, the killer's license plate number was not recorded. Because the attendant saw so many people every day, he couldn't even recall the man's exact appearance, and could only vaguely remember that the man seemed to have a slight Spanish accent. Soon after, news of the murder at the Temple Street parking garage spread throughout New Haven. For a time, it caused quite a panic in the area. Many people, especially women, were afraid to go out alone. As the investigation progressed, the police identified a suspect. The first suspect they found was named Delito. He was the victim Penny's ex-fiancé. Shortly before the incident, Penny had a big argument with him, and as a result, called off the engagement. So the police brought Delito in for questioning. Delito naturally denied everything. Later, the police arranged for the day's witnesses to identify suspects. Unexpectedly, several witnesses all identified the same person, and that person was Delito. It was later discovered that Delito was not the person the police were looking for. He just happened to look somewhat like the killer, because Delito's blood type was not O, and at the time of the crime, he was dining at a barbecue restaurant. 12 witnesses in the restaurant could testify that they saw him at the time of the crime. Therefore, Delito had a solid alibi. The police had the wrong person. At first, the person in charge of the case, Detective Mazzacon of the New Haven Police Department, believed that this case would be a piece of cake because they had blood evidence, fingerprints, and witnesses. Both witness testimony and physical evidence were present. As long as they investigated each possible motive one by one, it would only be a matter of time before they caught the killer. However, with the misidentification of the first suspect, the case immediately hit a dead end. Mazikhan suddenly realized that this might be a random killing, which is the most difficult type of case to solve. Although they already had quite a bit of evidence in this case, the lack of key information caused the investigation to remain stagnant for a long time. That period lasted 11 years. In 1984, a man named Galino attracted the police's suspicion. His wife had been Penny's high school classmate. She reported to the police that her husband had threatened to kill her, just like he had killed Penny back then. Coincidentally, Galino had an inch-long scar on his left hand, which matched perfectly with the police's deduction that the killer had injured his left hand. Unfortunately, after testing Galino's blood, it was found that his blood type was a not O. So once again, they had the wrong person. Later, the police found other suspects, such as a chef named Tobik, who often visited Penny's clinic, had many accents, and was also type O blood. But it was eventually confirmed that he was not Penny's killer either. 10 years before Penny's murder, her mother had passed away. Since then, she and her younger sister had relied on their father. Penny's father was named John. After his wife's death, he cherished these two daughters even more, especially his eldest daughter, Penny. After the incident, John sold his small factory and used all the money to find his daughter's killer. He even placed reward advertisements in newspapers, stating that anyone who could provide a clue would receive a substantial reward. As time went by, his money was running out, and he could no longer afford the expensive advertising fees. The ads in the newspaper became smaller and smaller, but he still used the same tagline. "Today is the nth day since my daughter was killed. The killer still hasn't been found." Later, some newspapers, taking pity on him, gave him a small, inconspicuous corner in the newspaper to place his ad for free. But decades passed, and no one provided any useful clues. As John grew older and suffered from the long-term pain of losing his daughter, his health deteriorated day by day. As long as the killer wasn't found, he couldn't face his daughter. The immense mental pressure made him live in pain and self-blame every day. His greatest wish in life was to find his daughter's killer and seek justice for her. He heard about a famous Chinese-American detective named Henry Lee, who was highly knowledgeable about forensic evidence and was a top expert in this field. So John, holding on to his last hope, found Henry Lee. He held Henry Lee's hand, tears welling up in his eyes, and said in a trembling voice, "You are my last hope." After hearing the details of the case, Henry Lee decided to take it on, to help this elderly man find his daughter's killer. The first thing Lee did was lead his team back to the crime scene to recreate the events using all the information they had. By combining the physical evidence with the actual location, it would be easier to understand the whole case. Soon, the entire sequence of events was reconstructed. On July 16, 1973, which was a Monday, Penny didn't have to go to work at the dental clinic because it was her day off. She drove her father's newly bought blue Buick to Temple Street, planning to buy some furniture at a nearby mall. So, she parked in the Temple Street parking garage. Because Penny was a new driver and not very skilled, she went to the lower floors of the garage and found them all full. The few remaining spaces were very small, making it difficult to park. So she drove all the way up to the 9th floor, where there were hardly any cars, and found a random spot to park. Soon after parking, a man somehow got into Penny's car. When Penny saw the stranger, she began to resist. She remembered there was a small knife in the car, so she quickly took it out to defend herself. Then the two struggled with each other. Penny used the knife to make a deep cut on the killer's left hand. Blood immediately poured from the wound. Penny saw her chance, quickly opened the door, and escaped from the car. She ran as fast as she could. With his hand injured, the killer, furious, got out of the car and chased after Penny. She ran and shouted for help, which caught the attention of two witnesses. But Penny didn't see any passers-by, and instead of running down, she chose to run up. She ran from the 9th floor to the 10th, but that was the top floor of the garage. Beyond that was only the rooftop. With the killer closing in, she had no choice but to keep running toward the rooftop. Then she was caught by the killer on the stairs to the rooftop. The killer stabbed her twice in the chest. She fell to the ground. Seeing this, the killer fled down to the 9th floor to Penny's car. He took some tissues from the back seat, pressed them to his left hand to stop the bleeding, then took out his own handkerchief and wrapped it around. Then he started the Buick and drove it down to the 8th floor. He got out, quickly looked around for his own car, but couldn't find it right away because he had forgotten which floor he parked on. So he walked down the stairs to the 7th floor, looked around, but still couldn't find it. Then he went further down to the 6th floor, then to the 5th, and still couldn't find his car. Then he suddenly remembered that he had parked on the 7th floor. So he went back up 2 floors from the 5th to the 7th and finally found his car. Before getting in, he accidentally dropped the handkerchief he had used to bandage his hand. Then he drove away in his own car. After reconstructing the crime, the next step for Henry Lee was to work in his specialty, forensic evidence analysis. Lee believed the two most important pieces of evidence were the tissue box from the back seat of the Buick and the handkerchief found on the 7th floor. In the 1970s, when the case occurred, DNA technology was not yet used in criminal investigations, so determining the killer based solely on blood type was very unreliable. By the time Lee took over the case, DNA technology had gradually matured. However, he soon encountered a problem. These pieces of evidence had been stored in the basement for decades. Whether DNA could still be extracted from them became the key to solving the case. Then, using his unique techniques, Lee successfully extracted partial DNA from the handkerchief. Then, from the tissue box, using chemical reagents and laser technology, he collected the fingerprint again. This fingerprint was much clearer than the blurry one obtained in the 1970s. He then uploaded this fingerprint to a computerized fingerprint database, making thorough preparations for solving the case. For several years after that, no one matched this fingerprint, but perseverance paid off. Finally, one day the fingerprint database alarm was triggered. If you work hard enough, even heaven will be moved. In the summer of 1994, a woman reported that she had been a victim of domestic violence. Her husband's name was Grant. He was an auto mechanic at a repair shop in Waterbury, which is only about 20 kilometers from New Haven. Following procedure, Grant was taken to the police station, and his fingerprints were taken. No one expected that this fingerprint would match the one Lee had uploaded to the database. On April 24, 1999, 26 years after the parking garage murder, the 56-year-old Grant was arrested at his home. 3 years later, the case went to trial. Grant hired 3 well-known lawyers to defend him and denied the murder charges against him. The defense argued that the fingerprint on the tissue box in the back of the Buick could have been accidentally left there by Grant while shopping, and that this particular tissue box just happened to be purchased by Penny. Furthermore, the blood drops left in the parking garage could not prove anything, because although the blood type matched Grant's, type O, there are simply too many people with type O blood in the United States. Next, the prosecution's forensic expert, Dr. Henry Lee, testified. He stated that the two most crucial pieces of evidence were the tissue box and the handkerchief. The fingerprint on the tissue box belonging to the defendant Grant was no longer in dispute, so the focus now shifted to whether the DNA on the handkerchief belonged to the defendant Grant. Dr. Lee explained that among the DNA extracted from the handkerchief, there was a specific genetic marker combination, HLA-DQ6, alpha 1.2, and type 3 gene complex, that exactly matched the defendant Grant's DNA. Although complete DNA could not be extracted from the evidence, the detected genetic markers indicated that only 5% of Caucasians in the United States possess these characteristics. The defense lawyer argued that the handkerchief had been stored in poor conditions, causing the bloodstains to degrade naturally, making it impossible to detect a complete genetic sequence, and therefore could not definitively prove it belonged to Grant. However, the defense's arguments seemed weak in the face of Lee's evidence. In the end, under mounting pressure, Grant confessed to his crime. He claimed that he had only gone to the Temple Street parking garage to steal a car and had made a mistake in a moment of impulse. Subsequently, the defense lawyers, who had previously pleaded not guilty, changed their plea to nolo contendere, no contest. In September 2002, the Connecticut Superior Court handed down its verdict. The defendant Grant was found guilty of murder, sentenced to 20 years in prison, and would not be eligible for parole until the age of 80. With this, the 29-year-old murder case was finally solved. The victim's father, John, had used everything he had to find his daughter's killer. In the end, he found Henry Lee, who helped him successfully identify the killer. Unfortunately, John had passed away 8 years before the court's verdict, succumbing to a terminal illness. He never got to see the killer brought to justice. In his book, Henry Lee recalled that in John's final moments, he called Lee from the hospital and said, "Don't forget my daughter." Soon after, John passed away. In the end, Henry Lee, with his keen sense for evidence, used the evidence to uncover the truth and did not let John down. He brought the long-hidden killer to justice. I believe that at the moment of the verdict, father and daughter, John and Penny in heaven, could finally rest in peace.